Today on Cryptic Mass Guitar, I try something a little different. I'm going to call this the 3 levels of Gibson with the Epiphone Les Paul Standard 60s, the Gibson Les Paul Standard 60s, and the Gibson Custom Murphy Lab Ultra Light Aging 1960 Les Paul Standard. And we're going to go over some basic spec differences here. I will take the plates off the back and we'll take a look at the potentiometers, the capacitors. We'll talk about the amount of wood and stuff like that, but not doing anything too crazy or too long. And then yes, I will play the guitars and we'll be able to actually hear what each of them sound like up against each other. But keeping in mind that guitar is 10% sound, 90% feel when it comes to the importance of the guitar. So because of that, I can't tell you what guitar you should buy, nor should I. That's really up to you, your hands, your body, and of course, you know, your wallet. Mine gets angry at me. So a couple of housekeeping items here just to help you out. Number one, if you're looking for something more in depth on the differences, take a look in the description down below. I'll leave the links to the 3 What's the Difference videos that I did where I talked about and showed the differences between the Epiphone and the Gibson, the Epiphone and the Custom, and the Gibson and the Custom. And if you're looking for something that just is more focused on like sound differences, I'll leave links to those comparison videos there as well, so you can get something a little more focused to, you know, what you might be looking for. Also, there's chapter markers down below. So if you're just here to validate a purchase and you want to just hear the sound differences so you can hear the one that you just bought and go, I made the right decision, and go, I bought this one. You fell for marketing. Which is funny when they say that about the Gibson, because the best thing to do is just go, so why didn't you buy the Epiphone? Okay, so with all of the stupidity and the necessary stupidity, I don't understand people, out of the way, and again, I'm sorry for that, let's actually get into the meat and potatoes of the video here, which is the spec differences. Now, again, I don't want to go crazy. I'm just going to show you some of the basics rather than, you know, like going through absolutely everything. I want to show some things that are very important, some things that some people might not know, and I want you to keep in mind a lot of the difference don't matter to people. All 3 of them are guitars. So if you want to buy a guitar so you can play a guitar, you can record with a guitar, play live with a guitar, you can do it with all 3. Just keep that in mind. I kind of just want to start things out with a blanket one. So instead of showing like, hey, this is this, this is this, this is this. So we already know that the Epiphone, made in China, that keeps a lot of the costs down. They have this disclaimer, which I'll put over my head, or maybe I don't know where I'll put it on the screen. They have this disclaimer when it actually comes to their specs. What that allows them to do is if they like maybe get a deal on Wilkinson tuners instead of Grover tuners, they'll use that and they're allowed to use that. Still perfectly fine tuners. Also, when it comes to them saying that the body is mahogany, oftentimes it's just it's in the mahogany family. They used to do that with the rosewood as well. But that is something to keep in note, and where they're sourcing their wood from, they use veneers, so they use veneers or solid colors, so they don't have to grade their wood. The Gibson is made in the USA. That automatically brings production costs up. They source and they grade their wood, so they have specs that they have to meet for their weight for their wood and how they look and stuff like that. So they actually have to pay people to grade them and weigh them. That brings costs up. When it comes to the Gibson Custom, that's made in a separate building. So it's not in the same building as the Gibson USA. And they're made by specialty trained people. They're not like all master builders like the Fender stuff and everything. But that's automatically going to start bringing production costs up. And when it comes to the historic reissues rather than like the modern series, where those are just like upgraded USA versions made in the custom shop, the historic reissues, they source parts, like individual parts. So they use specialty knobs, and they use aged hardware, and the screws are aged. Like even just for the VOS, like the outside of Murphy Lab. the inlaid material is flammable when you're working with it, so you have to have specialty people that actually use those. So that automatically brings up the pricing. The Murphy Lab is a specialty department inside a specialty building. So there's definitely going to be cost differences. I just wish the customs, you know, I only have one kidney now. I don't, I have two, but that's a good joke. All right, so that's my blanketed section. Let's actually take a look at the individual guitars. I'll start with the body. So on the Epiphone here, we have a slab mahogany body with a maple top. Now, nice figuring on the back, isn't it? That's a veneer. So veneer, basically, we've got like, it's not a sheet of paper, but it's like a thin sheet of wood that they roll out here and they glue onto the body. That's to hide what the wood actually looks like and to hide the amount of pieces of wood that are actually glued together to make this guitar. Same thing on the front. We have a AA maple flame here, but it's a veneer. So it does show like it's a two-piece maple top. I have no idea how many pieces of maple are here on this top. I tried to get a little bit of B-roll footage. So like here's what the veneer looks like on the back, so you can kind of see it's a little different. Like there's a difference in the colors. And then I was able to actually find that this was 4 pieces of mahogany glued together because there's no veneer on the side on this one. So you can sort of see the seams of wood because there's a color change in all of them. So we've got 1 seam, 2 seams, 3 seams. Putting that together, we have 4 pieces of mahogany. And that is all finished in gloss polyurethane. With the Gibson USA, we have a slab mahogany body with a carved maple top, just like the Epiphone. However, we have a AA flame here on a 2-piece maple top. It is actually a piece of maple. So it's not a veneer here. And then when you look at the figuring on the back, other than like, you know, the scratches on the back from my daughter when she was young and always taking this guitar and another guitar out of the rack and scratching them. But this is actually what the mahogany looks like on the back. Now, Gibson USA for their Les Pauls generally use 2 pieces. So there's usually a center seam or an off center seam. And it's just the wood is glued together, and that's how they make the guitar. The body is also finished in gloss nitro. With the Gibson Custom, we have a slab mahogany body and a crazy figured chevron pattern, flip matched, not book matched, maple top. Now, the mahogany that's on here, you'll be able to see some, you might be able to see some scratches because it's a Murphy Lab and it is aged and it's a lot of checking, a lot of nice light checking here. This is a single piece of mahogany. It's also lightweight mahogany. So like I said, they pay people to weigh the wood, and if it meets spec, then it becomes the mahogany body. Once again, this is real maple. So it has that carved maple top on it. We don't have any veneers here. And this is finished with, it's called Murphy Lab finishing. So it's like an aged finish. So the nitrocellulose lacquer that's used here is just a little bit thinner than what's on the Gibson USA. Taking a look at the neck on the Epiphone, we have a mahogany neck. Now, I can't say that it's a one-piece mahogany neck or anything like that, because we do have a joint here where it meets the body. So the neck is basically from here to here. So there's a joint here on where it meets the body. And then we also have a scarf joint here on the headstock to show how the headstock's kind of attached. The fretboard is a bound Laurel fretboard with perloid trapezoid inlays. We don't have fret nubs on here, which some people hate, but this is the only example of an Epiphone that I've ever played that has really sharp fret ends. Definitely an anomaly. The Gibson has a one-piece mahogany neck that is attached via what's called a short neck tenon. The fretboard here is a bound rosewood fretboard. It does have the fret nibs, and we do have acrylic trapezoid inlays. The Gibson Custom has a one-piece mahogany neck that is attached to the body via a long neck tenon. The fretboard is a bound rosewood fretboard with the aged cellulose nitrate inlays here. Remember the ones that I talked about saying they were flammable? The binding here on the neck is a little thinner, and because it's a Murphy Lab, they actually round off the edge of the fretboard just a little bit more. And the fret nibs that are on here are just a little bit smaller than the ones that are on the Gibson USA. The neck patterns for all three guitars are considered 60s slim taper. However, the Gibson Custom is just a little bit thinner. They basically, for their 60s, they have, it's like V1 and V2. I don't know which one is which. One is like super, super thin, which they call the blade neck. And then the other one is like a slim taper. So the one that I have is more slim tapery, but it's just a little thinner than the USA and the Epiphone. Looking at the front of the headstock here on the Epiphone, we have a Graphtec nut. We have the inlaid Epiphone logo and the silk-screened Les Paul model logo. And the tuners that are on here are Grover Rotomatic 18-to-1 tuners. They are a little bit thinner than the Grovers that are on the Gibson USA, but they still hold their tune rather well. They're still also modern sizing, so if you wanted to get the locking versions, they're just drop-in tuners, or if you wanted to swap out for any other modern size locking tuners, you can do that without widening the holes. On the front of the headstock for the Gibson USA, we have a Graphtec nut. We have the inlaid Gibson logo, which is definitely actually inlaid, unlike the Epiphone, which I'm not sure, I can't get a straight answer on. And we also have the silk-screened Les Paul model logo. As far as the truss rod cover, it comes with two, one that says standard, one that's just a blank to be a little more historically accurate. And we have, for tuners, the Grover 18-to-1 Rotomatic tuners. They're a little thicker than the Epiphone versions, and they're still modern sizing, so any other modern sizing locking tuner if you want to swap out for, easy to do without widening the individual holes. On the front of the headstock for the Custom, we have a nylon nut. It's rigid nylon. It's not like your mama's stockings. And then we have the inlaid Gibson logo here. Again, it's in the cellulose nitrate, so that flammable stuff. And then we have a period correct silk-screened Les Paul model logo. The truss rod cover here is one of those sourced ones. So it's a 2-ply, and it's just probably a lot more expensive than it needs to be. And finally, for the tuners here, we have, again, period type correct. So we have vintage sizing. So if you wanted to swap out for modern size locking tuners, you got to bore out the holes to widen them a little, or ream out the holes to widen them. We do have the Kluson double ring, so there's two rings here on the plastic part for the tuning buttons, but they're the vintage deluxe tuners. Pickups on the Epiphone here, we have the Epiphone ProBucker 3 in the bridge, the Epiphone ProBucker 2 in the neck. Both of these pickups here are Alnico 2. The pickups for the Gibson USA are the 61R and 61T. So the T is in the bridge, the R is in the neck. They're now called the 60s Burst Buckers. These are Alnico 5. And then the pickups on the Custom are the Custom Bucker Alnico 3 pickups. So we'll take the cover off the control cavity here, and let's take a look at the potentiometers on the Epiphone and the wiring. So it's very quick to note, this has modern wiring. It does have CTS potentiometers here, but it does kind of look like a bit of a rat's nest. The potentiometers are soldered, but then they're attached to the pickups via a quick connect. On the back of the Gibson USA here, with the cover off, we will note that we have the CTS audio taper potentiometers. We have, it's sort of like a hand-wired harness. So it is all hand soldered in here. There's no quick connects. And with the Gibson Custom here, with the cover off, you can see that we still have the CTS audio taper potentiometers. Things are, holy geez, clean. Very clean, hand soldered. This is very, very well done. But I believe the potentiometers are sourced from like a Chicago company or something like that. They're still CTS and everything, and the audio taper, but they're sourced from a different area. This also has 50s wiring rather than the modern wiring. Now the last thing before we actually get into the sound samples here, because I don't care about talking about the cardboard box versus the case versus everything that comes with the custom, we're going to talk about the capacitors here, or as someone tried to correct me, the cap. I don't know why you call it a capacitor. It's called a cap. Capacitor is not a real word. Verbatim. Anyway, we're going to look at the caps, but I think that it's really important to note to some people, because some people don't understand that if your tone is set to 10, your capacitor does not matter. It's not in the signal, that it's closed off from the potentiometer. So the capacitor doesn't really come into play until you start, like, dialing back on your tone, which is a great trick for a lead, or if you're playing clean and stuff like that. But let's take a look very quickly at each of the guitar's capacitors. So on the EPIPHONE here, if we look once again with the cover off, you'll see, it's kind of hard to see, but I'll move things around and you'll be able to see that we have a generic little red capacitor. There's nothing wrong with the little red capacitor, but when you see the other guitars, you might go, oh, okay, well, I see a little bit of a difference. And here is the orange drop capacitor in the Gibson USA here. It's very important to note, orange drop capacitors in Canada, where I'm from, it's like $6 to $12 per capacitor. And like, if you've never soldered before, you can still do it yourself. You might just burn your fingers a little, but it's not an expensive upgrade. And finally, onto the Gibson USA, cover back off. We have some people call them just the paper and oil capacitors. Some people call them the Bumblebee style capacitors, but we have very different capacitors here. I don't know, well, I think it actually says they're sourced from a company called like Max or something like that, or I'm probably saying it wrong. It's probably a different company, but they source it from a different area. When you go to source this type of capacitor, just so you know, there's like a cornucopia of different prices that you can find. And I went down a rabbit hole once and paid like $200 for capacitors and ended up just liking the capacitors that were in the guitar that I have, and didn't want to be bothered to put in the capacitors. Why? Because I'm stupid. Okay, so that's it. I'm sorry if that's really, really long. But if you want something more in depth that's a little longer, maybe you can go to sleep to. Don't sleep to my voice, you'll have nightmares. But I'll, again, link in the description down below for all those individual videos. But I do want to actually look at some playing. I'm going to do something that I don't like doing, for the simple fact that I find it boring to make it. I like, recording, because that's kind of what I do. But these aren't like double tracked. They're not played along to a drum beat or anything like that. I've been watching a lot. I only watch 3 guitar channels on YouTube. Greg's Guitars, anything with Gregory Cockery, Greg Koch, and Peach Guitars. And it's usually when I'm looking at, like, a certain guitar that I want to buy that I actually watch them. But I'm just playing, it's single tracked and everything. I have 4 sound samples, and then what I do, I play the EPIPHONE, the Gibson, and then the custom, and then I actually cut out. So you hear the EPIPHONE, the Gibson, the custom, then the EPIPHONE, then the custom again, so you can hear all of the guitars back to back. And I'll tell you what you might want to listen for as well. And then the only thing is, there is compression with YouTube that can affect the audio. So what I'm actually hearing in the recordings might be a little different, how it comes across, and especially how you're listening to it. I don't know why people want to keep telling me I'm listening to these on Apple, AirPods Pro, and I can't tell a difference. Those are not flat response headphones. So, okay. Anyway, I'm going to start off with the neck, and I have to read off of my notes here, and like, I don't like doing that, but like, honestly, it's probably the best way of actually doing it, because I spent, after recording them and stuff like that, I spent a long time actually listening to each to help out with what you might want to listen for. So the first sound sample is going to be just the neck, volume and tone on 10. So what you want to listen for here, the EPIPHONE When you listen to it, you're going to immediately hear, okay, well, there's some nice low end, but it doesn't have a lot of definition, and there's not a lot of clarity as well. I know definition and clarity can really fall into the same category, but when you actually start to listen from one guitar to the next, as long as the compression hasn't killed it, it just becomes a lot more apparent. When you go to the Gibson, it's a little brighter with a lot more definition. And then when it comes to the Gibson Custom, it's not as bright. There's much more clarity and definition as well. And you can actually really hear the give on the emphasis note. So again, after I play all three, I'm going to actually play the sections so you can hear. So you'll actually hear the note that I'm talking about. And you'll be able to hear on the Gibson Custom, there's just a little more give in it, like a little more oomph in it. The second sound sample here is in the middle position, still volume on 10 for both the bridge and the neck, and then tone 10 on the bridge and the neck. The Epiphone, the first hit on the A string is a little dull, and there isn't much punch on the bend. The Gibson, there's much more clarity and a little more high end along with more punch in the bend. So when you actually hear the first note, the first A, from the Epiphone to the Gibson, it should be a little more apparent on what you're listening for. And the Gibson Custom, just a little more reserved because the 60s pickups are a little hotter on the bridge. It's a little more reserved with a little more definition, and the bend has a little bit of twang to it. So a lot of people will actually claim that the custom buckers or the early PAF pickups have sort of like this Telecaster-esque sound to them, which I can kind of see. I don't know that I would necessarily say it that way, but I heard on the bend it was just a little twangy. Third sound sample is the bridge. So what you want to listen for here, the Epiphone, when striking the whole E chord, even though I'm in E flat, we're missing a lot of the note definition, and the higher strings sort of blend in together. It has those pickups, they can come across a little trebly, but there's just not a lot of note separation in them. The Gibson itself, like the USA, certainly more present. So there's a lot more of the like high end and stuff like that in the high mids. You can tell that it's a much hotter pickup, and the hammer-on is a whole heck of a lot more clearer. A lot more clear. The Gibson Custom, we still retain a lot of that presence, but we now have a lot of resonance. So we actually have a nice mixture of like the high end and the low end together. And it's very apparent when you go from the Gibson USA to the Gibson Custom. The pickup, you can tell, is a lot more dialed back. So I usually say dialed back or reserve when it's not a hotter pickup. And there's still a lot more clarity on the chord itself. And once again, from the last one, there's a little bit of a twang feel when I play the hammer on. It's just something that I'm noticing, and I could be crazy on. And the final sound sample here, because we talked about capacitors, I wanted to make sure that they're actually being used here, because it's highly important. And as well, I dialed back the volume. So we're back on the neck pickup. The volume's at 8, the tone is at 7. So again, the Epiphone and the Gibson, modern wiring. The Custom is using 50s wiring. So with the 50s wiring, what ends up happening is your tone starts to actually affect the volume on your pickups. If you're down back on your tone, your volume's probably going to go down a little bit. So if you're taking down the tone along with the volume, there's going to be a bigger effect and it'll, in essence, clean things up a lot more. The modern wiring, once you start turning down your volume, it darkens the tone. So we're turning down the volume and we're turning down the tone. So let's, here's what you want to listen for, sorry. The Epiphone, the modern wiring again, so we talked about that, darker tone. You can hear a little more of the high end in the slide lick, but it's not necessarily dull, but we're still lacking a lot of clarity. Now, with the darker tone, clarity doesn't necessarily go out the window, but it's going to be less likely than if the tone was up. The Gibson USA, modern wiring, we already talked about that. You can actually hear the slide lick is a little cleaner and there's a little more definition. Just kind of the central theme from the Epiphone to the Gibson, just a little more definition there. It's still very dark because modern wiring, and we turn down the volume and we turn down the tone. The Gibson Custom, again, 50s wiring, so we already know what that's like. Every note here is very clear, and the open E string, even though I'm in drop C sharp, doesn't overpower the entire thing. So you're not hearing like this droning C sharp that kind of overtakes everything. And it's not this weird like flubby mess that you're listening to the entire time. And it, again, cleans up the signal very well. Okay, so that's it for all of the playing sound samples. Once again, take a look at the link in the description down below. I've got the links there if you want something that's a little more recording focused and focused on like different sounds rather than just using one amp with each of the guitars. So that's it for the differences here. I want to reiterate here once again that I can't tell you which guitar is best for you. I can't tell you which one's going to work, you know, the best for you and make you happiest. You have to play them. You have to go to the store, play them for a while. Don't just play that guitar. The best thing to do when you're going to buy a guitar, if you're going specifically to buy a Les Paul standard 60s, play a 50s. Play Studio Modern, play a classic, play a Strat, play a Telecaster, play a Gretsch, play a couple of Gretches. Gretches are great. But play different guitars and then go back to the guitar that you're after and just have that mental note of, okay, did I change my mind? Am I still feeling the connection that I thought I would have with this guitar? And then, you know, compare that to, you know, what's in your wallet and, you know, that looming threat of financing and stuff like that. And that's really how you want to do it. You just feel things with your hands, feel how it feels on your body when you're playing, and again, match that with what's in your wallet. And that's really the answer. Because it doesn't matter what guitar I own or what guitar I like, because I could be playing for less time than you, could be playing for more time than you. I've been playing for 30 years. And I could just have had different experiences and I have different preferences. So it doesn't matter, you know, it doesn't make sense to match what I'm playing or what someone who's actually a really, really good player is playing, or like a famous person, because they could just have different hand senses and preferences than you. So if you buy the Epiphone, this is what I read all the time, is people comment, I own the Epiphone because I'm broke. But like I own the USA and the custom, but I'm broke because I own the custom. It is the way that I like to respond to that. But because you own the Epiphone doesn't make you broke or poor. You know what I mean? It's what you do with the instrument and if it actually promotes you to play it. So don't listen to someone telling you, if you bought the Epiphone and you like the Epiphone, or you bought the Gibson and you like the Gibson, or you bought the custom and you like the custom, just don't listen to anyone else. Just enjoy your guitar. Thanks for watching.